Will you stay? I'll stay. When you move, I'll move. I will follow.
So one of my favorite shows, back when I was in college, it's not running anymore, that I really loved watching was a show called 24. Who watched 24 here? Did anybody watch 24? All right, we got some people. So some people know about it. So a lot of y'all who don't know about this show, it's a pretty interesting show. Had a very interesting dynamic around it. So it's about this man named Jack Bauer. He is a federal agent, works for the counter-terrorist unit. And so how 24, how they've kind of formatted this show is that it actually, every hour of the show is supposed to correspond with the hour of a certain day. So it's supposed to be what they'll say in real time. There's 24 episodes because there's 24 hours in a day. So it'll go through each hour. And like the whole 7 seasons that it ran, it pretty much goes through the exact same thing. Jack, he is, nothing's going on there. It's a good day, and all of a sudden there's a terrorist act that happens, and then he has to do something about it. And so what you see as he goes through these 24 hours, the stress obviously starts building up, the tension builds up, the worry builds up, and you see him oftentimes placed in almost impossible situations, having to make impossible choices. Something we'll call the stress test. And so in the middle of this, you see who Jack really is, what he really stands for. And it resonates with a lot of people because he'll do things that, he'll do whatever it takes to save people, even if it takes breaking a few laws here and there. And actually, in the end, it shows who he really is, and also shows a lot of his coworkers who they really are as well, and how they respond to all the various things that happen. And so, this morning, we're going to see what happens with Paul. Because sometimes through these tests, sometimes the best rise out among us, sometimes the worst comes out of us that we might be quite ashamed with. So Paul here is in the middle of his stress test. So we've been talking and kind of going through Acts. We left off with Paul on this ship to Rome. So we know that it's been a long time coming, a long journey for him to get to Rome. It's been 2+ years right now. And then now he's finally on his ship to Rome. And where we left off is Paul tells the centurion, the guy in charge of the ship, he goes, I think it's best that we don't set sail. And the centurion listens to him and says, I'll trust the captain on this one, and they leave. And we kind of leave there going, well, what's going to happen, right? Paul's like, this is not a good idea. He says that in his opinion and his advice, from what I see, there's going to be a lot of cargo and a lot of lives that will be lost. So we pick up from 2 weeks ago, and we see that Paul's advice to not sail is ignored. So I'm pretty sure at this point in time, him and his 2 companions that are with him are probably holding their breath and praying to God that everything's okay and nothing will happen, and it will just be a safe journey. So here it is. Right, we're in chapter 27. The worst has come true. The worst has come true. The waves and the winds has come. And the ship is just getting rocked, and the lives and the cargo and the people are in real danger. The storm has come, blowing the ship completely off course and putting everything in jeopardy. But even in the midst of this, we see that God continues to challenge Paul with this one resounding thing, this theme that's just been going through all of Acts. Right? Trust in Him. Don't give up. Trust in God's plan. So the big idea this morning, before we dive in, the big idea that we want to really harp on and focus on in this passage is this. When the storms of life are here, and when the storms really challenge God's calling for you and where you're supposed to go, how would you respond? How are you going to respond? Will you respond by folding, or will you respond by trusting in Him? God constantly challenges us to trust in Him, to trust in His plan, and lead others along the way in that. That when we follow after Christ, regardless of what happens around us, it's always the same thing over and over again. Trust in me, trust in my plans, and lead those who are around you to do the same. So in other words, when difficulties and hardship threaten God's calling in your life, trust in him and lead others to do the same. When difficulties and hardships threaten God's calling in your life, he always calls us to trust in him and lead others to do the same. But oftentimes, it seems really difficult to trust God and trust his plan, isn't it? It's very difficult to trust God and trust his plan, especially when things are hard. But what we see, the first thing is, trusting ourselves will leave us helpless and hopeless. Trusting ourselves will leave us helpless and hopeless. So let's go and turn. We're in Acts chapter 27, verse 13. Acts chapter 27, verse 13. And I'll read from verse 13 to verse 20. It says, "Now, when the south wind blew gently, supposing they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete, close to the shore." So far it looks everything is going well. But soon a tempestuous wind called the northeaster struck down from the land. And when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and were driven along. Running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. So there's this little boat, this big ship that will drag along if you need to get to land or whatever. So it's like this small boat. So they had to take that boat out of the water and into the ship. After hoisting it up, they used supports and undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they will run aground on the Cyprus, they lowered the gear and thus were driven along. Since they were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo. They're throwing the cargo out the ship to try to lighten the ship because they're just getting too much water. And so they're throwing the cargo out. And it goes, and on verse 19, it says, "On the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands." And what the ship's tackle is pretty much their backup stuff. Their backup sails, their backup, main, or all those things that if anything happens, they can replace it, they can fix it. But they toss that overboard because it was too heavy. So they're desperate. When you start tossing things like that overboard, you're getting desperate. And here we are in verse 20 goes, "When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest laid on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned." All hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. Now that just sounds gloomy and hopeless and helpless. But here's the thing. When we start trusting ourselves and trusting to save ourselves, it will always leave us helpless and hopeless. When we start trying to trust ourselves to save ourselves, kind of like how these sailors are trusting themselves and trusting their strengths, trusting their intellect to save them from this storm, it leaves us hopeless, leaves us hopeless. God never asks us to take on difficulties in these storms by ourselves. He doesn't withhold them and say that they'll never come, but he'll never ask us to take them on by ourselves. He doesn't ask us to save ourselves. It's always about trusting God, saving us. It's always about God, trusting God to save us. So as many of you know, about 3 months ago, I became a first-time father to this little baby girl that has now really has me completely wrapped around her finger, a little pinky finger. And oftentimes I'll look at her and I think to myself, this is a very great responsibility I have. Because in my mind, there's very little room for error. I can't forget to, feed her, or Dana and I can't forget to feed her or change her. Can't leave her at home. Whoops, where did the baby go? I thought you had her. Oh, we left her at home. It's okay, It's not like a dog where you can just leave at home. They can take care of themselves. And I go, literally, I have this little girl's life in my hands. That if I make any mistake, I could potentially end her life right there and then. Can't really drop her from my arms. Can't neglect her needs. And I think to myself, this girl can't do anything by herself. She can't. In fact, no infant can. A lot of us, you have to be at least a teenager before you can actually kind of take care of yourself. For some of us, maybe a little bit longer. Yeah, a lot of you's like, me? Me? No, not me. All right, so what we realize is when they're so small and so young, they have no choice but to trust their guardians or trust their parents. They have no choice. She can't go out and hunt. She can't go find her own milk. It's not going, I'm going to go find a cow and milk it and drink it to survive. She can't even walk. She can't even lift her arm without smacking herself in the face sometimes. She is in complete and desperate need for her parents. And oftentimes, God paints us in that picture. That God says, you are my child. I love you. I'll take care of you. But you are just an infant. You're small. You can't take care of yourself. You need me. And when we try to trust ourselves to do when we're trying to trust ourselves to save ourselves, it's just impossible. It's an impossible task. And a lot of us understand this, and that's why the gospel is so resounding in our life, because the gospel is about the Son of God, Jesus Christ, coming to do what we can't do, which is save ourselves. He came to save us. He came to pay the penalty we cannot pay. He came to take the consequences we couldn't bear. We couldn't not have a relationship with God without Christ paying that on our behalf. And for a lot of us who are believers, who call themselves Christian this morning, we understand that. But it's easy for us to kind of move past that, as if that's the starting point of Christianity, and then everything else, all the problems and troubles and hardships that come along the way, now I have to handle that myself. But it's not about that. It always goes back to trusting God and trusting His plan and trusting that He will save us. It's always about trusting Him and not trusting ourselves. So here's the thing for us this morning, for all of us sitting in this room. Will you lay down your burden? Lay down your hardships. Lay down whatever is going on in your life right now and trust Him in this. When it seems like you feel like God is calling you to do something, and every step along the way, hardship comes or detours come, will you just lay it down and go, I trust you. I trust that you're going to take care of me. I trust that you're going to love me, because you have and you always will. I trust that you will pull through. It's easy for us to talk about that. It's so difficult for us to do. And even for me, as I was going through this week, it has been a just incredibly difficult week trying to write this sermon. And I was like, man, I need to think about how creative I can be, or make sure these examples really are spot on, or what does God really want people to know? And then I end up finding myself trusting myself. And I go, wait a minute. I'm completely neglecting what God's saying. If you trust in yourself, you're going to leave helpless and hopeless. He's always saying, trust me. In the midst of the storm, He says, don't trust yourself. So we see how trusting ourselves, it leaves us hopeless. It leaves us helpless. But trusting God leaves us fearless. Trusting God leaves us fearless. And that is our second point. Trusting God leaves us fearless. When we trust God's word, we are not afraid because we trust His plan. We trust His power. Let's look from verse 21. We'll pick up where we left off. And it says, since they have been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, men, you should have listened to me and not set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. He's not rubbing it in their face. He's trying to build up the repertoire like, okay, really listen to me, guys. I have something important to say. And you see that I am, the things I said that you can trust. He goes, yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, only of the ship. Because for this very night there stood before me an angel of the God whom I worship, whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar, and behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on some island. When the 14th night had come, as we were being driven across the Adriatic Sea, about midnight, the sailors suspected that they were nearing land. So they took a sounding, found 20 fathoms. A little farther on, they took a sounding again and found 15 fathoms. And fearing that we might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. And as the sailors were seeking to escape the ship and had lowered the ship's boat, the boat that they just saved a little while ago, they lowered the boat into the sea under pretense of laying out anchors from the boat. So they're pretending like we're going to lay down more anchors, but they're really trying to escape the ship. Right? So, and as in verse 31, Paul said to the centurion and soldiers, unless these men stay on the ship, you cannot be saved. Then the soldiers cut the rope of the ship's boat and let it go. This is going a little crazy, right? It's a little nuts. We see that Paul is very fearless. He goes, hey, an angel of the God I worship came and told me that we will be okay in the sense that our lives will be saved. Remember what I told you a little earlier? From what I observed, I'm going cargo and lives will be lost if we head towards this direction. But you know what? Praise God. God says that he will spare our lives. Cargo will be lost, the ship will be lost, but our lives will be saved. And Paul's like, do not be afraid. The angel told not to be afraid. He says there's no, and he goes, he has faith and God will pull through. So do not be afraid. Do not fear for your lives. Take courage. Take heart. There's no fear in Paul. And it's so funny because he sees some of these sailors who are just, they're so desperate. They're so scared. They're so afraid. And Paul's like, can't leave. Not going to be good. And you see the soldiers cut the boats. Like, all right, we're going to listen to Paul. Cut the boats, and his boat sails off. I'm pretty sure in the back of Paul's mind, like, well, probably could have used that boat, but all right, you know. But he's saying, we see that Paul is so fearless. Even when things like that happen, he's going, I trust, you know, God told me that we'll be safe, and I'm going to trust him in that. I trust him. But growing up, for me, you know, kind of in lieu of just finishing watching the NBA Finals, just a really exciting series this year, this season, it kind of reminded me when I was growing up. So I grew up in what I think and what I feel, I still believe, it was the golden age of basketball. You know, I had a chance to watch one of my favorite players growing up, which was Michael Jordan. I loved watching Michael Jordan. I remember when I was young, I just had all these, you know, I collected basketball cards. I had Michael Jordan cards. I had his jersey. I had, you know, a Chicago Bulls jacket, and I was just a huge fan of Michael Jordan, just like almost every other boy growing up at that time. He seemed invincible. And the legend just continues to grow as we get further and further apart from his retirement. As you watch ESPN now, you see, well, LeBron, you know, who's better, LeBron or Michael? And they still compare everybody, every great player to Michael Jordan. And when I was younger, I remember watching the NBA Finals. I remember watching him play. And for me, the question wasn't, will the Bulls win? Will Michaels pull them to victory? The question was, for me, maybe as ignorant as I was or as trusting as I was, how will Michael lead them to victory? Instead of going, well, how does the story end? My question was, how will the story play out? Because I already know how the end is going to be. He's going to win. Just kind of curious how he's going to do it. And I remember watching buzzer beater after buzzer beater. I remember going, I'm not even afraid that they're going to lose. I'm just excited to see how dramatic it's going to be. I used to think when I was younger that they would intentionally lose games in the final so they can win in Chicago. I really believed that. And I still do. I was like, oh, they did that on purpose because they're going to win in game 6 at home. Oh, that Michael, he's so smart, right? And I remember watching the flu game. I remember watching the buzzer beaters. I remember watching the last shot that he should have taken before he took a Wizards jersey on, right? Somebody's like, Wizards? Who are the Wizards, right? All right. I remember that. I remember that. Just that faith and trust I had in him, in his ability, in his drive, in his will to win. And it was that I didn't have that fear. I didn't think they were going to lose. I never thought that was going to happen. And we see that Paul has this type of fearless trust, even more so than a small boy like me. He had this fearless trust in God because he's seen God do it time and time and time again. Just as in my mind, in my recollection, I did not remember seeing Michael ever miss a single shot ever. I'm pretty sure he has. But God, he never failed us. Just as we say in the song, he's never made a mistake. He's never missed. And time again, God goes, my promises are true. My promises are trustworthy. You can trust me. And we see that Paul has this fearless trust, not only because he trusts that God's plans are good and God's power is good. He trusts that God's character and his integrity. He's not going to pull the rug under him. He trusts that God has the strength to do it. He trusts that God has the foresight to know that the plans that he puts him on is always the best plan. He trusts God. And what I love about here is this juxtaposition where trusting ourselves versus trusting God. And you kind of see it right next to each other. The sailors trusting themselves and Paul trusting God. And the attitude for us, and the question is not about do we trust God, it's about our attitude. And what is our attitude in trusting him? Is it the drag my feet, fine, I'll trust you. I don't like what you're doing. I don't think this is the best plan, but I'll trust you because you're a guy, because you're just the slave driver and you're the one that calls all the shots. Fine, I'll do it. Is it that way? Or is it the trust like, hey, I'll trust in you, but I'm just going to have a plan B just in case if you screw up and things don't go my way? Or is it trust? Is it more of the trust like, I trust that your plans, you'll do your plans, but I don't trust that you're good? So I'm really upset that you made me incur all this loss and injury. I'm really upset that I didn't get into this school. I'm really upset I didn't get these grades. I'm really upset I didn't get this job. I'm really upset that I didn't get this pay raise. Fine, I'll trust in you, but I'm not happy with you. Right? The question is, what is our attitude? Is our attitude the, fine, I'll trust you because I have to. I trust you because that's what a Christian's supposed to do. I'll trust you because I have nothing else to turn to, and I guess you're my best option. Or is this fearless, all my chips are on the table, I'm ready for what's going to happen next type of trust? Is it that trust that going, hey, I know the end to it, I'm just curious how the story plays out. And I'm ready. Even though there's hurts and suffering that come my way, even though I know it won't be easy, but deep inside there is a sense of peace going, I know he's going to pull through. Just you wait, my God will pull through. The question for us is, what is our attitude for trusting God? How does it show? Are we trying to cover our bases? Are we going, here's the keys to the car, I'm ready? We need to trust that he's good, he is powerful, that he loves us. We need to trust that he won't lie to us, that he does have our best interests in mind, that he wants to take us on a journey so we can become more like him, that we can reflect him, that we can be closer to him. And that's the confidence Paul has, and that's where our confidence should be as well. And here's the really cool thing, that when we have that type of confidence to trust in God's power and trust in God's plan, it allows us to lead and encourage those around us. allows us to lead and encourage those around us in a way that we can't even do by ourselves. And look at verse 33. We're in chapter 27, verse 33. And we'll read to verse 38. He goes, as day was about to dawn, Paul urged them all to take some food, saying, today is the 14th day that you have continued in suspense without food and have taken nothing. Therefore, I urge you to take some food, for it will give you strength. For, here's the promise that he's just giving over and over again. Not a hair is to perish from the head of any of you. And when he had said these things, he took bread, and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. And they all were encouraged and ate some food themselves. We were all 276 persons on the ship. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, throwing the wheat into the sea. We see that the sailors and the passengers were still defeated. It's 14 days, not really eating much or eating at all. They were still in their state of despair, even though Paul had this fearless trust in God. And here Paul is encouraging them and reminding them of the promise God has made them. God reminded them, goes, hey, the God I worship, you might not know who he is, but the God I worship has promised that he will save us. He will pull through. Take some bread, and he eats it, and they see that, and they're like, all right, that's, they see his trust and his fearlessness. They see the faith he has, and they follow suit. They eat, have one last meal, and then throw the rest overboard. And go, that is so amazing how this one person was able to encourage the 276 people on this ship. This one person. I'm going, God has said that for us, with that fearless trust, with those around us, even in the midst of our storms, oftentimes there's some people that get kind of wrapped up in it as well. Because our hardship sometimes includes other people, because it could just be something that we can't control, and we have this opportunity to lead and trust those around us. So some of y'all might know that I actually listen to a lot of country music. I'm a country music fan. It's a lot bigger than most of y'all imagine. Country music does make money. It's very popular music. And so when I moved here about 3 years ago, I found the country music station. It was 95.7 The Wolf. And slowly this station that I grew to love became a local sports talk radio station, right? And so I started listening to that, and not like I really cared much about the teams here, but kind of grown to take a liking to the A's because of that. But anyway, so I really love country music. I love country music. I love the stories that they tell. I love just how things are, and just kind of like how they paint a picture about life. And I know some of y'all out there won't fess up to it, but y'all love country music too, and that's cool, That's right. Praise the Lord, right? But anyhow, there's this one song that I really, really enjoyed. Because I loved the picture he was painting. It's a song called Watching You by Rodney Atkins. It's a song, might sound like a creepy song, but it's not. It's a song about the Rodney Atkins. He actually wrote, he's a singer-songwriter. He actually wrote a song, and what inspired him to write this song was that he wrote this one song that was probably not very appropriate for a 4-year-old to sing, right? And then he kind of hears back from his teacher that his son is singing his song in class. And they're like, you probably shouldn't have him sing that song. So it kind of inspired him to write this song. So the song is about a 4-year-old that watches his dad and emulates and kind of patterns what his dad does, both the good and the bad. And the chorus is kind of like his son telling his dad, talking to his dad. And so this is how the chorus goes. It goes, he said, I've been watching you, Dad. Ain't that cool? I'm your buckaroo. I want to be like you and eat all my food and grow as tall as you are. Because we like fixing things and holding Mama's hand. We're just alike. Hey, ain't we, Dad? I want to do everything you do, so I've been watching you. And it's just like, it's so cool because in some sense, a lot of us are in that position. Some of us as fathers, but some of us as coworkers, as students, as friends. A lot of us are watching us, wanting to follow our example. That we have this opportunity to lead and encourage those around us. Because when storms and trouble comes, people are looking for someone or some example and go, and then for them to know and see the type of faith that we have, they can't help but wonder why. And we can be that person that points them to Christ and constantly point them to Christ. I've heard of so many stories from y'all talking about how things going on at work where you go, being bold and going, I will pray for that to happen. I will pray for this to happen. And I hear stories how people who don't know anything about Jesus or anything about church will come back because they see God working and go, hey, can you pray about this as well? Hey, can you pray about that as well? That we have this great opportunity. You don't have to be a counselor at Footprints. You don't have to be a church leader. You don't have to be up here. It could be your coworkers. It can be your friends at school. It could be your family. As a father, it could be you leading your child. Or as a mother, it could be you leading your children. They look to us, that we can encourage them and we can lead them to Christ and lead them and just give them a glimpse of what faith looks like. And it's so cool to see how God encourages these sailors to do something that they probably really didn't want to do by throwing cargo overboard, eating their last meal and throwing it overboard. And I know, for us, we need to remember that a lot of people are looking at us and watching us. And just a quick note to parents, your kids are watching you. Your faith, your kids in some way, in some form, more oftentimes than not, will pattern. If you show that you trust God, more oftentimes than not, statistics shows they will trust God. If you show one face at church and you're another person at home, more oftentimes than not, they will see that and turn away from God. It's not to say that we're going to ruin our kids' lives because none of us are perfect, but it's being made aware that our kids see us and they follow us. And they see what you place as important and what you don't. Am I saying education is not important? Of course not. I want the best for my kids as well. And I understand that a good job is important. I understand financial security is important. I understand that trying your hardest and giving your best effort at school and extracurricular activities is important. I agree with you 100%. My question is, at the expense of what are you going to do that? At the expense of eternity? What if the message you send your kid is school, success, jobs, career is much more important than following Christ? That Christ comes second to that. Kids pick up on that. I've seen it. I've seen it before. I've seen it time and time again. I've seen it in the past. We have a great opportunity to lead and encourage those around us with the faith that God has given us. For a fearless faith, we have this opportunity. So the encouragement this morning for us says lead our families, our church, our coworkers, those who don't even know Jesus. Let's show them what Christ really looks like in the midst of trials, in the midst of your trials, in the midst of your pain. Use that as a testimony and go, this is how God is good. This is how God uses this. This is how I am trusting God in the midst of all of this. So when hardships and difficulties come, and inevitably they do come, the question is, how will you respond? Will you fold and give up? Will you allow the situation to dictate how you respond? Or will you allow God to work through it and trust Him fiercely in the process? And lead and encourage those along the way as well. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you for showing us that you are a trustworthy God in the midst of storms, in the midst of trials, in the midst of hardships, in the midst of uncertainty. Your promise constantly is true. Just because you don't do the things you want us to do, or you don't do the things we want you to do, doesn't mean your plans are flawed. Perhaps it's looking at ourselves and seeing that our plans are flawed. So Lord, teach us to trust you and not trust in ourselves. Teach us to lead those along the way and show